There's a moment in One Piece that doesn't look important at first. No massive clash, no dramatic speech, just a bar, a group of pirates laughing, and one man explaining why dreams are stupid. That man is Bellamy, and for a long time, he might actually be the most honest pirate in the room. When Bellamy is introduced in the Jaya arc, he represents something that doesn't show up often in One Piece. A pirate who has already given up on the idea of dreams. He's not chasing the One Piece, he doesn't care about Sky Islands, he doesn't believe in legends, myths, or anything that sounds even slightly ridiculous. In his mind, the world has already moved past that phase. To Bellamy, pirates who chase dreams are outdated. They belong to a different era, an era that's already dead. And the thing is, Bellamy didn't come to this conclusion randomly. He's part of a generation that grew up after the execution of Gol D. Roger, a generation that saw the explosion of piracy, but also the consequences of it, the chaos, the failures, the people who chased something impossible and ended up with nothing. So instead of dreaming, Bellamy adapts. He chooses realism. That's why his crew operates the way they do. They don't go after legends, they don't take risks chasing myths. They hunt weaker pirates, rack up easy wins, and build their reputation through intimidation. It's efficient, it's practical, and more importantly, it works. Bellamy built a name for himself this way. By the time we meet him, he's already sitting at a 55 million berry bounty, which is nothing to ignore in Paradise. But what really defines Bellamy isn't the strength, it's his attitude towards people who think differently. The bar scene in Mocktown is one of the clearest examples of this. When Luffy starts talking about Sky Island, Bellamy doesn't just disagree, he ridicules him completely. He laughs in his face, calls him outdated, and turns the entire bar against him. To Bellamy, Luffy isn't just wrong, he's embarrassing. And then things escalate. Bellamy and his crew beat Luffy and Zoro down without much resistance. And what makes this moment stand out isn't the violence, it's the reaction. Luffy doesn't fight back. Zoro doesn't fight back. They just take it. From Bellamy's perspective, this confirms everything he believes. Dreamers are weak, they don't survive in the real world. But from the audience's perspective, especially if you understand Luffy, it's the opposite. Luffy isn't refusing to fight because he's weak, he's refusing because Bellamy isn't worth proving anything to. That disconnect is important because Bellamy thinks he understands the world, but he's completely misreading it. The turning point comes when Bellamy attacks Mont Blanc Cricket. Cricket is everything Bellamy despises, someone who has dedicated his entire life to proving something that most people think is a lie, the City of Gold, the Sky Island, a story that sounds ridiculous if you're grounded in reality, and Bellamy destroys it without hesitation. He beats Cricket down and steals the gold he's been collecting. This is Bellamy at his peak. Confident, untouchable, completely convinced that he's right, and then Luffy comes back. The fight itself is short. Bellamy uses the power of the Bane Bane no Mi to launch himself around Mocktown, bouncing off buildings, gaining speed, building momentum. He turns the entire environment into a weapon, moving in ways that are hard to predict. It's flashy, it's aggressive, but Luffy doesn't overthink it. He waits, times it, and ends the fight with a single punch. That punch isn't just a physical defeat, it's a complete rejection of everything Bellamy believes. Because in that moment, Bellamy is forced to confront something he never accounted for. What if the dreamers are stronger? What if belief isn't a weakness? What if he's the only one who's been wrong this whole time? After this, Bellamy disappears from the story for a while. But unlike most minor antagonists in One Piece, his story doesn't end there. We later learn that Bellamy actually went to Sky Island, the same place he mocked, the same dream he laughed at. He found it. And that detail changes everything, because Bellamy doesn't just lose to Luffy physically, he loses ideologically. The world he thought he understood turns out to be bigger than he imagined. When Bellamy returns, he's carrying a massive golden pillar from Skypiea. It's proof, not just that Sky Island exists, but that he was wrong. But instead of fully embracing that realization, Bellamy redirects himself. He doesn't become a dreamer, he becomes a follower. Specifically, he devotes himself to Don Quixote do Flamingo. Doflamingo represents a different kind of truth, a darker one. Instead of dreams, Doflamingo believes in power, control, and manipulation. He understands the cruelty of the world and thrives in it. For Bellamy, this makes sense. If dreams aren't the answer, then power must be. Luffy. So Bellamy reshapes his identity around serving Doflamingo. He trains, he gets stronger, his bounty rises to 195 million berries by the time we reach Dressrosa. On the surface, it looks like growth, but it's not real growth, it's replacement. Bellamy didn't find his own path, he just swapped one belief system for another. When we see him again in Dressrosa, he's clearly changed. He's calmer, less reckless, more focused, and importantly, he no longer mocks Luffy. In fact, there's a level of respect there. But even with that respect, Bellamy is still chasing something external. He wants recognition from Doflamingo. He wants to prove that he belongs. And that's where his story starts to break down again. Because Doflamingo doesn't value him the way he thinks. To Doflamingo, Bellamy is disposable. This becomes painfully clear when Bellamy is manipulated into fighting in the Kurita Coliseum and later used as a pawn in Doflamingo's larger plans. At one point, he's even ordered to kill Luffy. And this is where Bellamy's internal conflict finally comes to the surface, because now he's stuck between two things: the man he respects and the man he's devoted his life to. He tries to follow the order, but it's not the same as before. Back in Jaya, Bellamy would have attacked without hesitation. Now there's doubt, there's hesitation, there's conflict. The fight between Bellamy and Luffy in Dressrosa is completely different from their first encounter. It's longer, slower, more emotional, and honestly kind of uncomfortable to watch, because Bellamy knows he can't win. He's aware of the gap between them, but he keeps fighting anyway. Not because he believes he'll win, but because stopping would mean admitting that everything he built his life around was meaningless. And that's a hard thing to face. Luffy understands this. He doesn't want to fight Bellamy. He doesn't hate him. If anything, he sees someone who's lost. But Bellamy forces the fight over and over again, pushing himself past his limits, using his devil fruit in increasingly desperate ways to try to prove something that isn't there anymore. Eventually, Luffy ends it, but by this time it's not humiliating, it's not a statement, it's mercy. And that's what makes this moment land, because for the first time, Bellamy isn't being crushed for what he believes, he's being released from it. After Doflamingo is defeated, Bellamy's story takes an unexpected turn. He doesn't join Luffy, he doesn't try to rise again as a pirate, he doesn't chase revenge or redemption in the traditional sense. He walks away. Bellamy retires from piracy and becomes a dyer, a craftsman, someone who works with his hands instead of trying to prove himself through strength or status. That might sound like a step down, but for Bellamy, it's the first real decision he makes for himself. No more mocking dreams, no more borrowing someone else's, no more trying to fit into a world that doesn't align with who he actually is. Bellamy isn't one of the strongest characters in One Piece. He's not the most important. He doesn't shape the world in a massive way, but his story adds something the series needs: a look at what happens when someone loses direction and what it takes to finally find it again.